Yak aya yuxatini ya khana. Chakuksa away Johan. Wasa achtu yak wuchin khasati. Velisatin away kudas achtu sagu. Is kudasio achjieti. Achwawe shakatku has outliechtu. Yak kudasi. Wan qaninsu ya Hawaii. Hastu ani dakhayach to us a kudas hastu yukatangi kaye wuti. Jayuk ginki ach was a ku hastu yukatangi. Konachayak Katachwa sayak away at de has at de kai has out to ye. Wasach to yak hastu in yejachanean. We have I iku. We gao gosh. Dag unjen kat. Talk sure he hen away. Is Jay Guginki has aus cool no has to yukatangi. Gosh, de handed cool, the cut it Lingít on a car. A data way you has aus atkin. Was at Gakwane yaha yukatangi. Kleshatu or school who ha our ha yukatangi. A joy a data way and has wunak. Wasa wuke aya. Yes, schoon has our lechen. Shuka aya has to yetkitin. Aha puna leo you do a sack, or questing git renach yukatangi kudi. Ye awa where yukatank konachoyak a kut. A kachawe outlook at away. Wait at e. Cats at e away. Chikle awa has to tea awa has to yetki. Has to e outlet to has to yukatangitsu. Ye awa has to us a kutyach tea away has to schooni. A kawe chakuchkoon has our lechen. Ya ye that wash. Which at okaneech was a tea yesu. Ya has to yukatangi daye kwati. Ka adaki. At katsko. Yis ka yis shawat. Ka schoon klein so. Atunach has got what PhD has to us a go has to yukatangi tin. Usha cheesh. Yewa ach to us a go ha yukatangi tin so. Yet aya ha ye jine. Ako konachayek atachi yeti. And Nakaya has kautak eat. Ya hashish kohas. Has the Shetini awe haji yeti. Ye away kwati Johan. Jadasa had to us a good tushle yehi goshi kwati. Aka wait that soon, Jagut good the secrets that he just link it kinach akaye yeti. Yewa ach to us a go. Achu Khan has a kawanik. Ya ach tu yanik. Klechach yes, a joy just Lingít reinach. Has to inawe kachwanik. Klaik. Just the cut Johan haji yes. Klechatina chaoti glad kach inach. How you katangi to konach yak Klechach to our school just the cut that they are katunigi. Klechatina chaoti. Just Lingít reinach aya. Aka kekwak Just Lingít yukatangitina ya gartutlach. Ye awa hatu wasagu. Konachoe kekwak gwal the cut ka aya. Stu hasaul tuun awa ha yukatangi. Konachoe achtu wasagu. Gunil chiishach sa achi. Ya khana. Hi goyach chwan. Jaguksa away. Wasa aya stu yishtu. Ya achtu wasagu. Ye tlaqi. Ya ha yukatangi. Akakonachoe. Achtu wasagu ya kandadeni aya ha yukatangi ya harqinach. Yekakwati Johan, yekakwati. Yewe yekogeyach yukatangi. Atu itzaka kwahaya yidat. Jadasa dan. Jadu sadu tuasagu.
Yake Xitini Yage Yahune San Francisco Day Yan Hwad Ken Tatke Och Ish Hwatin Tatke Ka word for last week.
Clia Sandechak.
Gunchish. Klakwan yadu. Ayakat. Yesu. Gunchish.
Okay, Gulchish. Achachets awe heshwasa uti awe ish.
Siena Kakuni?
Achachets heshwasa uti ish. Okay. Adusatu tu tuasagu yuqitani. Qanachach tuasagu yisachwa achi.
Cook. Yakewe sahwa ahi akune.
What's up? Gunchish yakexitini.
Well, it's a goodness cheese hat you goody.
Gunchish.
Untaxa issue he tuck on kehatuti. Hechosaku. Ya Shushaki Niko Hakaye uti. Yatliakutan. De shu. Skut. Aye haswutian. Aye hawutian. Ye wait a tlady hino a hatka akshat. With Nasjan katka nask kai, you do a sakwe atcha dake hiti. Kanachwe ashagu, gade awe dus iye. We wasus gli kakukli. Ya akshat kakhat hatu wasagun. Ye we hayetki. Hastu nakaya wutu wakuch. Aka awe adewu wutu wakuch. Aya achilko has ani. Jilkat. Kit gushi hitaya yidachawe ach kladu ish chawe daklawe di tachana yachat achlil ko hasawe we tak an ku kashtul likawe yidu asak ya du tla ya achlil ach kladu ish de ish we an katachzin ho oe lukach adi ya kashtul lik du ish we dana wak ye oe you do sagen Ho lukach adi. Ye ach tuas good tuck on aya adecho kuchu. Hosakucho has to tuas go. He hlwasaka kwati has to dot. Hosatin awe would day a kaye would tea. We anachen. Ye hwaji o has to tuash good jakut ku a day kuchu. He hlwasaka kwati. Ani sawe aya hatuasagu we ḥlishik nik ya tu glaqi aqa hellasa kwati at llkata an ka aya tuqhu qa daqqa qadakhuyah tuasagu adekhu qhu llkat qutan aya aqeqat natijin qa I khwallatu qa wujin wutullatu ya yuch Deislin ka natasayin ka kwan lin I qawe khatu latish ya ach daqqa khunkiyan qakan akhkaniyan chish
Gunchish akune.
Hadu satsu tsukke Tletra khanach tau adasa
Kusui dakawedi yatke not in that way. Kusui yatke.
Achetki ya ha hiti e hasuti ya hasuk ayati awaslechen ya ballet team ya daknacha ko ya de itch ai ya ach dech asik achid just ya e hasyati kone ka I khwashatu hajoy we kashuk kusuk adi tin awe has kusuk kwashyate ya iPad di do sago at yeah has to twasagu. Ha it ke kloa ha e koti e koti.
Ikwa kwan.
Cheese, what's Das hat zu Johann. Chakutatke. Recap ke. Finish cheese. It's always good to just speak Lingít. I mean, that's what we're here for. So don't be afraid to try. You want to just bring something, share it with us, and we'll find ways to just sort of talk about it, or it might lead us to other things to talk about. But there's very few places, you know. I had these, we first moved to Juneau and we had these landlords. And they said, yeah, we used to live in Huna back in the 80s. And you used to hear Lingít all the time. We couldn't understand it, but we knew we were hearing it. We knew enough to know when we heard it. He says, and now we just don't hear it anywhere. Even if we go to other communities, we don't hear it. And it's pretty common, you know, that you just hear it less and less. So it's important to hear it, and it's important to, not everybody has to, but if you want, even if you just put 4 or 5 sentences together to share with us, love to hear it. No pressure. This is not a pressure environment. I was talking about cool shirts, and I like shirts that are made by indigenous peoples. Akshat, my wife, she does a really amazing job keeping me in the cool shirt business. Because if I picked them on my own, I'd probably just, what's the word? Chooky? Is that what they say now? I don't even know how to say it now. Probably look like I'm out of style. But I'm excited. The show Reservation Dogs comes out today. I was thinking about that. If you don't know what it is, go check it. You gotta have Hulu, but go check it out. It's indigenous television, and same with Rutherford Falls. If you haven't seen that, check it out. It's just such an amazing time to see just television shows that are by and for indigenous peoples. It's just really amazing. It's just not something that I had when I was, you know, back in the day. And then I was also talking about, I like shirts with, I would like to have shirts with just Lingít on it. I have a friend who one time I was like, we don't translate it. That way it's like this inside thing and it's an identity thing. And a friend of mine said, well, I feel bad because I feel left out. I feel like that's making an in group and an out group. And I said, well, everybody should be in. We'll teach everybody. But at some point you have, you know, I got a colleague, she teaches Gwich'in, and it's Shinlai. And she says at some point, you got to stop translating, you know? And so that's not to mean we're going to leave other people out, but there's got to be a world where we don't always need the English for it. And so I was thinking about that as well. And I worked with folks in Hawaii. I studied with them for a long time. And I like to get shirts from there too. They got all kinds of shirts there just in Hawaiian, really cool stuff. And and oh, I see. Okay, let's collaborate. I'm down. I'm happy to make designs and to help design the shirts. And if anybody's a designer, an artist too, help me from being too old-fashioned with it. But then I get, you know, it's probably 40 years ago, and there's less than 200 speakers of Hawaiian probably at that time. And outside of this one little island, there are no children that were growing up speaking the language. So they did a lot. They built their own schools, starting with these things they call aha punanaleo, which translates to language nest. And then they built schools after that. And now they've got, you can't even count the Hawaiian speakers. And at one point, I remember somebody saying this when I was over there. They said, I don't remember when it was, but I remember the time when I didn't know every single person who spoke Hawaiian. I was like, wow. Because, you know, there's certainly been some times over the last decades that I've been working in this language where somebody speaks, I'm like, whoa, I didn't know they spoke Lingít. And so I'm looking forward to that time again. And that does happen. We all wear masks these days too, so sometimes it's hard to tell who's who. But I was walking the post office just not that long ago, and somebody walked by and said, "Yik satini." I said, "Oh, guns cheese. What's to yik satini?" And I was like, I don't even know who that was. And we're speaking Lingít. It's great. Yeah. And then we talked about other like families and Klukwan and going to San. If anyone wants to chime in about what you were talking about, go ahead. Going to Klukwan, going to San Francisco, check on his dad, and being happy to hear from each other and to see each other. And I wish I could go to Klukwan, but I know we're all being safe.
I wish you could, man. We just got 2 COVID cases now in Klukwan. I'm in the quarantine house myself just to make sure I get my test back before I go out to back home.
Yeah, my auntie just picked it up in Kodiak too. So
tough
times. I really look forward to when we can just travel, because I haven't gone to the interior. I usually go there every summer. Usually go to Klukwan on a regular basis. We were in Chilkoot last summer, and my wife and I, we wanted some burgers from Nuschin Nuskakai, 33 mile. And so we drove up there, and I was like, oh man, maybe we'll swing in Klukwan and say hi. But they had gates up and stuff. I was like, yep, that's smart. So we just had our burgers and went back. We ditched the kids. That's how we ditched them. So, but with a friend, so we had a safe family we're hanging out with. Anyways, great to see everybody. Any further things that anybody want to talk about? I mean, or just questions. Any questions you've got about the language? And I saw in the chat too. It's good. Yeah, some things can have translations, but maybe some things are just we could tell people what it is, but maybe they'll be like, oh, that's cool. I want to learn. It's like read all the shirts, and so.
What's that do with sock? Teslin Lingít Reinach Jilkat Yana Koch.
Oh, Yana Koch, yeah.
Lingít Deslin Lingít.
Chishuku Yana Koch. Yana Koch.
It's that Yana Koch.
Yeah. So what he's asking about is there's this vowel, so the to the oo vowel, right? So vowels can be short and long, oo, right? And then it could be high or low. But those are your 2 versions in terms of like oo. There is this thing with Jishkat Lingít, the speakers from Chilkat, which is often called Klukwan, and Teslin, and where one of those U vowels, it could be short, could be long, could be high, could be low. When there's one of these characters with an underline on either side, we call them gutturals or uvulars. When there's one of those on either side of the vowel, it'll become a O vowel. Like that's the sound. So you'll say kok. As in other communities, you'd say cook, right? So kok. And so trying to document like what triggers that, it's usually one of those underlying characters. So there are some exceptions too. Like we'll look at a word today, hadla. And that phrase is hado when you go to the inland, right? So that O sound is distinctly there. And it's also there in a short form. So if you say they are boating or driving, you'd say yanakukh. I'll put that in the chat. So yanakukh. And if you're in Teslin though, or in Klukwan, you'd often say yanakukh. So it just goes to an O sound, to O. So that's a dialect thing. That's an absolute dialect thing.
Geez, me and Steph, or Sakina were talking about that the other day because I got a little mixed up again. But there was something else you mentioned right now besides that word. I had a brain fart in the middle of thinking about it. What was that other word you were just?
Oh, I said cook, or no, I said coke, maybe. So there's coke and coke. Those are two different things. And I was trying to chat. I was trying to answer a question in the chat, but I'll do that in a second.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So this one is a box, and it's cook with the we call it sometimes the back K or the underline K, the guttural K, the uvular K. If that's on the front, it's a box. If it's on the back, it's a cellar or a pit. Like if you're going to build an old Lingít house, you would make a cook, and then you would, put in your house posts and then start putting the house up. So yeah, those ones would both go to the O sound. So you'd have coke and coke. And so sometimes getting that underline, like switching it over is really interesting. And so there's this other pattern where you have something and then you go to hit ton. So one of the things about the history of Lingít people is you have lots of migrations and lots of formations of different clans, maybe 70 some clans total. And some clans they grow out of other clans, right? So usually if it ends with ton, it was from a migration out of some other clan that usually ended with ʼadudli, ʼadí, or ʼáyi. So the ʼadí part, or the ʼadí, is a possessed form of the word ʼat, which means a thing, something. So you could have something like, there's a place called ʼqanach, right? And those are the two sounds. We usually say ʼqanach. And so qa means pleasant, or sometimes satisfactory. And then nach is a bay with steep sides, like you might call it a fjord. So qa-nach is this sheltered fjord or sheltered bay. And so you can have the adi at the end, qa-nach adi, the things of qa-nach. And that's how a lot of clan names are made. The ʼadī part usually means there's some other vowel before it. Yi plus ut will become yate. Like shayate is from sha, yi, ut, head, below, thing. So that's the way that Lingít works. It likes to really smush things together a lot. But then if you have a clan name, or you have a clan house, like if I'll just use one from Ku, ish, ka, hit. So ish is a fishing hole, ka is on, and then hit is a house. So if a group leaves the house and says, we're going to become our own clan, they might take the name of that house. And then ishka hit tan becomes ishki tan. Deshu hit tan becomes deshi tan. Kawagani hit tan becomes kagwan tan. So there's usually some contraction that goes on there. It's often predictable, but sometimes a little bit hard to predict. But I bring this up because there is a kuk hit and there is a kuk hit. So what gets a little bit tricky is you have kuk hitan and kuk hitan. And those are also, one's an eagle side clan or wolf side, and one's a raven side or crow side. So it's really, someday, like I'm gonna find someone who's from the kuk hitan, and I'm gonna make them marry, or maybe convince them, entice them to marry someone from the kuk hitan, so that they can have kids who'll be kuk hitan and kuk hitan yeti, and everyone has to really listen. Say, oh yeah, no, those are two different clans. Anyways, long answer.
That was fantastic. I really like that, and I remember the word I was going to try to ask you about, And I'm kind of wondering, Lance, if this is something that was just, I swear I've heard squat as a way of saying like hachqua.
Oh, really? Well, I know you could say chqua. So hachqua and chqua. So it just starts with the CH to the GW, which is pretty tricky. So there's this phrase, hachqua. I'll put it in the chat just that we have it.
That's what you get.
Yeah, that's what you get, right? So like, let's say you're talking to your kid and you're saying like, don't lean back on that chair, you're gonna fall down. Don't lean back on that chair, don't, and then they fall down. Hachqua. Right? And then, you know, it's just something you say and sing it sometimes. You gotta be careful though, because you gotta know the right situation, right? And if you say it to elders, then we'll just be like, they're a cool person, but they're not around anymore, right? And so you gotta be careful who you're saying this to. But yeah, there is a way to say it without the HA, so chqua. And then there's other like little phrases sometimes that you just get a lot of consonants in a row, right? So you got that one, there's actually two, the CH and then the GW, those are each one letter. And then you have the single vowel. But then this brings up another point, right? So there's this other phrase, ha'eh, or if you're from Carcross, you might say he'eh. And ha'eh has a bunch of different ways it can be used. Like you're kind of surprised and you're kind of, it's a little bit of a shame on you sometimes, or you took it too far, or, you know, it just depends on how it's being used in the context and who's saying it to whom. But there's that period right there. So HA period, high toned E. That means you cut off the airflow right in between the vowels. Ha'eh. And in Haida, this is an apostrophe is used. So you'll say hau'a, right? So you can hear that stop right in the middle. And then there are a few words in Lingít though that end with that period, that glottal stop. So it's a bit of an orthography question. If a word ends with that sound, so hachqua would be without it, hachqua. So it's got this pretty solid little ending on there. So we use an apostrophe because if it was it just might look like the end of the sentence or something, like an end of sentence period, if you use that. And okay, there's another hachqua question. What's the hachqua question?
I had an elder ask, tell me dusquat, like with a D and a pinched T, dusquat. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think I have. Has anyone else here heard of that? Like that? Is that what it looked like? Do you see it in the chat?
The way you pronounced it, yeah. I could have gotten the spelling. I could have misheard, but I did hear that, you know, I've read it and I'm familiar with it, and it just kind of caught me off guard. You know, I don't want to ask him to repeat himself too much or to ask him, you know, how to spell while he's speaking. But
did he tell you what it means by chance?
Kind of like do it again. That's what you get.
Huh. Oh wow. And it could be, and so that maybe that T, it could be popping up on the end. It could be just a real hard ending on that, because you're really cutting off your lungs to make that glottal stop, right? You closed your lungs. And so it could be sounding like there was a consonant there, but if you hear that T, then you hear it too. So there could be variations on that same phrase, which wouldn't surprise me at all.
And you talked about dialect, you know, he was from Yakutat. I don't know, or Yakutat. I don't know if that's had anything to do with it. Again, I could have misheard, but I did ask about it. I just didn't want to ask too many times.
Oh, sheesh. Yeah, I'll check with ʼusteeyí too and see if he's heard it, because
Yeah.
he signs on sometimes, and so I'll kick it his direction too. Because yeah, Yakutat does have a pretty distinctive dialect, and some of these dialect things are about a different word for the same thing. So like what's called yashushate, and other coastal communities, which is a cockle, is called sa in Yakutat, and what's called ʼadudli.átk in a lot of places, which are moccasins, is ḳusteeyí in Yakutat. But some of it too is like, some of that stuff does get a little lost as the, you know, I don't think there might not be any speakers left in Yakutat. Yeah, so that's a good question, but I'll ask too, because sometimes you also get just a slightly different way to say the same thing, like ʼaudagan, and we'd hear ʼudagan from some old Yakutat speakers.
Yeah, another example of that he shared was ooks, like OOKST instead of utsk.
Oh, like for little or something?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and so ushk and usk and uksk maybe, and yeah, and what's important too is if we're hearing these things or we hear people, because even a community that might not have speakers left, as long as we go there and we're speaking and we're teaching and we're talking, there'll be people who'll be like, oh yeah, my grandma said that, but she said it like this. And we got to capture some of those things to keep those dialects alive and well. Okay. Yeah, George Ramos is gone. Don't know about LC Beatty. Betty? Sorry.
Beatty, but we didn't know that George Ramos was gone.
Yeah, ḵusteeyí. And for the last few years too, he couldn't speak a whole lot. So he just had pretty onset dementia. He was a really good speaker, though. He was fun to talk to. Okay. Anything else you folks were thinking about or anybody want to share? Okay. So we were talking the other day about some of the classic documents of Lingít. Let me find one of those ones that I was looking at. Let's see, where'd it go? I'll find it eventually. Oh, here it is. So this, oops, let me change the view here. I guess I gotta zoom. So here's the document. It's called, you know, and so we talked about too, like Lingít was spelled differently. So this is 1972. Before, there was a lot of standardization. So standardization means, okay, we're going to write this sound this way. And it takes a lot of work for communities to sort of come up with how they're going to do things. Because if everybody writes it just how it sounds to them, then you might have a whole bunch of different ways and you don't know how to, you know, there's all kinds of people who've written stuff down. And sometimes, like, especially names, like, oh yeah, they wrote the name down for us. But then for sometimes the speaker is just saying, that's how it sounds to me. It sounds like this, you know, like, and it gets complicated too, because if you say duck, some people might put D-U-C-K because it sounds like duck at the beginning, right? And so the A sound is maybe closer to an, you know, in English, A has several variations, whether you're talking about apple or, you know, bat and stuff like that. And that sound is not in Lingít. So they used to write the A sound with a U and sometimes with a H at the end. So just sort of going through, you might sort of look at some of these things and it's a little tricky to read this stuff now. But if you go through and you know the phrase already, you can actually just sort of transcribe it pretty well. And we've also trying to get sometimes some fine tuning with some of the meaning and stuff as we teach some of these phrases, especially some of these, you know, what we call interjections, which is just like when you say something to, you know, like ʼatskani or something, and trying to make sure that folks know like how that thing is used and what it kind of means, right? And so you're usually looking for an equivalent in English, and sometimes you're just sort of saying, this is kind of as close as we can get. Yeah, okay. And sheesh, Sakinya, for sharing in the chat. Do you want to share any of that? Do you want to say any of that to us so we can hear it?
Achlil gledkach einach negi li, yushat shangukedi khetsati. Yake uxatini shangukedi yatki, Margaret. Ka yake uxatini tsu, jilkat yatki, kuk ka kune, ka whoever else is from there. Gunachish, Outer Coast, Lingít Yuchatangi class. Sekinya Yuchat Diwazau, Yesh na Chatsati, Deshiton Chatsati, Yan Yediaki Ayachat, Deshuts in Kwan Dach. I just learned that our original word for Teslin was Deshutzin, which was hiding your trail, people. And that goes back to the cannibals. There's a story that I just heard from Achat Kochachan, Yan Yedi Shawat, and she was telling me about that, about Harry Morris teaching her about how a long time ago, the way that it got its name was somebody was telling a young person, walk in your footsteps backwards after you go to the shore so that you hide your trail from that cannibal. And Indigenous Peoples Day, August 9th, Yidat, Deslin Kwan, Yana Good, Kleshwasaku. Travel to Kamloops, Glekach Enach, Ishan, Stekat Yatki, Achtech, Achtu Segu Yagayi. Gunelchish, Idanian is that.
Okay. Sheesh. And I think earlier someone asked, like, what can you say when someone says yakehati gudi? You say sheesh. Like that's the short one. Or and then you could follow it maybe with achtu yakehati. I'm happy to be here. Right. And so, but it's up to you as you sort of, one thing that you'll learn is if you're pretty new to Lingít is you'll learn how to put two things together. It's this, that. And it's interesting because there's multiple ways to do that. And sometimes you don't always, sometimes you have a because in there type of thing, but sometimes you just smush two things together and there's a pattern for doing that. And it's a lot of fun to sort of work on these. Yeah, sheesh, and good sheesh for those of you who are answering questions in the chat and keeping up with it helps an awful lot. Okay, sheesh. So I was kind of looking at this document today and I thought, oh, that'd be neat to sort of, because this was before Beginning Lingít came out, which I think was I've got the cover of that too. 1976. So this is 4 years before Beginning Lingít comes out. Lots and lots of people who are teaching Lingít and who have taught Lingít, especially going back in the 70s and 80s, and folks who are producing a lot of these wonderful texts, many of which we just need to update the orthography, because there's wonderful language in there and wonderful phrases and stuff like that. So I thought we'd take a look at some of the phrases and things that are in here for sort of like what they call this, common expressions in Lingít. So we'll take a look at some of these. Ask questions if you got them, or if you have things that you'd like to point out based on what we're sort of looking at. Feel free to chime in. I thought maybe what we'd try is I'll just say it and you all just repeat it, and we'll say them each a couple times. And then if there's things that could use some explanation, I'll try and provide a little bit and chime in if you know as well. So Sheldon Jackson College is a complicated place. There we have elders like ḳusteeyí, Selena Everson, who told us stories about going there and Lingít being outright banished. And sometimes they would laugh about it because it's the teachers would say, you cannot speak Lingít on these school grounds. And so they would jump in the air and talk real fast. And that was kind of their way of dealing with it. But some of them, like ḳusteeyí, Cyril George, with Selena, and they're both from Angoon, and she said he would still cry when he talked about what he went through there. But at the same time, in the 1970s, they're making a whole bunch of materials, including the Lingít Verb Dictionary and a lot of these texts that are coming out. Yeah, and so it's Sheldon Jackson himself was a complicated person because he didn't want the same things to happen to Lingít people and people in Southeast Alaska that were happening in the lower 48 with Native Americans. And so he was, in some regards, you could say he was trying to protect people. And he also knew, especially at that time, early 1900s, there wasn't a whole lot of prosecution for murdering and sexually assaulting Native American peoples. And so it's well documented from Sheldon Jackson that he was trying to protect Native people, especially from white men. It was just a tough time. But at the same time, he was actively banishing culture and language. And, But anyways, this comes out in 1972. Elaine Ramos was working on it, and other people who were noted here, Walter Adams, Joanne Peterson, Mary Helen Palmer, and Ed Schultz. And I just thought it was interesting to see, what do they start with? And so this is pretty much in the order. I added a couple things, took a couple things out. But here's some common expressions. You want to say thank you. There is this L, this unvoiced L, right in the middle. So we'll just go out, I'll say it, and you folks just say it after me. We'll do them each, maybe twice, maybe more. Gunashchish.
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 And then put her there. It's literally like, give me your hand. Hante ichin.
Hande ichin.
Hande ichin.
Ande chin.
Hante ichin.
Hande ichin.
Hande ichin.
Hante ichin.
Hande ichin.
Hande ichin.
And this one is poor thing. And it could be teasing, but it could also be very serious. Like if someone tells you some hardships they're going through. Ishan.
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 Gone.
Shan. Shan.
Ishan.
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 And then to ask what, like someone calls your name or you don't hear something. Dasa.
Tasa.
Dasa.
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 And for something to be all gone, or it's done, there's some different ways to interpret this. If you're telling a story and you'll say like, well, he fell down the cliff, Wooch, that means they died, right? So, but it can also mean like it's the last paper towel, it's the last of the coffee, it's, it's gone. It could also mean like, I'm done, right? You could end your speech with this if you want to. If it's in parentheses, that means that part is optional, right? Just kind of depends. So we'll try it without it, and then we'll add after. Wooch.
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 Hooch.
Hooch away.
Away.
Hooch away.
Hooch away.
Wooch away.
The next one is more like knock it off, right? So they are a little different. They are a little different. It's not good. It's not polite to use either of these if someone is speaking. Right? You're kind of telling them, be done now. And it's a little tricky. Those are tricky things. I've been in situations where someone, and maybe they are getting a little bit of dementia or whatever, and they're also an elder, and maybe they're pretty high up in their clan and they're talking, and then they just end up drifting. Just, it happens to everybody. And maybe sometimes they're going on and on and on and on. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. However, if you're dealing with people younger than you, then kinship plays a strong role in a lot of this stuff. A friend, especially if they're the same moiety. If it's opposite moiety, you could do a lot. But I'll tell you this. So you gotta be close to each other. A lot of the rules can be relaxed if nobody else can hear it. If it's just the two of you, longtime friends, cousins, whatever, there's a whole lot you can do. Yeah, and we're getting a little bit of feedback from some. I'll try and catch where it's coming from. I might have to, if you're getting a little feedback, you might have to stay muted during the practice part, sorry. However, so especially people younger than you, kids, nephews, so you could do a lot with commands and do it, don't do it. But you gotta be kind of careful with that stuff when you're going up the kinship. So going up, what I mean by that is parents, aunties, uncles, clan opposites in public. If it's in public, you're just safe to not tease your clan opposites. By opposite, I mean there's one side is eagle or wolf. The other side, the opposite side, is raven or crow. I have seen at ʼqusteeyí, at potlatch, a raven person and an eagle person teasing each other for entertainment. And it was funny and it was fun. As long as everybody knows it's fun and funny and nobody's crossing a line, it's pretty good. But if you're not sure, don't do it. I remember I went up, told a joke one time. It was about like wolves or something. And I sat down and ḳusteeyí and Nora Downhour said, it's getting a little too close. Like, oh, I better be quiet. Cool, what's up?
I'm kind of actually curious. I've heard de awe since I was a kid, but does it actually literally mean hit the road?
No, for me, I think it means like whatever you're doing, stop doing it.
I'm just trying to break down that de awe.
Well, I think the day part is actually, there are certain things like you can put on the end, like day, which means right now, right? So nata is a great example. Nata, go to sleep. Nata day. So the day
Gotcha.
at the end means do it right now. Clock,
Okay.
hurry, clock day. So for some reason, I think it might be that one. Because then if you say day away, it's sort of like, it just has its, and some of these too, it's not like A plus B always equals C. It's sometimes it becomes this other thing. So like, oh, in this context, you put these two things together, that's what you get. So yeah, this one, we'll say it. And it does mean knock it off. So you got to also be careful. Day away. Day away.
Day away.
Day away.
Day away.
And there's some other good
Day
context,
away.
right? Like maybe if someone is, they're really worried about something and they're just worrying themselves, you might say, day away, day away. Like that's enough, that's enough. So a lot of it has to do with the situation, the tone, if other people are listening. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, day away. That's enough. Sheesh. Yeah, and it could vary from place to place too. So here's the other ones from their from the text to say like yuck. You say ee.
E.
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 Okay. And to say, go ahead, do it. Gook.
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 So that's usually like, we already know what you're supposed to do, right? Like, you know, and so gook is to do it. And so it kind of depends, but it's sort of like it's already clear what you're supposed to do, because there's other ways to say like do it, do this, do that, and to specify. The other one, so the next one is shoo or scram, get out of here. There's two ways to say it. We'll do them each twice. Chook.
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 Juk.
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 Chook.
Juk.
And for a lot of these, you can add day. So like chuk day would be like, get out of here right now, right? Again, be careful with these. Like, and so there's a lot that could be done for teasing too. And when we started gathering phrases from elders, when we started talking about like kind of starting our own daycare, our own language nest here. Sorry, I'm gonna mute. I'm gonna mute everybody. It's just a little bit of feedback. They were laughing and they gave us a whole bunch of these. They started off with a whole bunch of these, like "Stay away, she's catching." They did, and they were just laughing. But you know, we raise our kids with kindness. We know that. But so hurry, clock,
Clock.
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 Really want someone to hurry. Clock day,
Clock day.
Clock day.
Day.
Hey.
clock day.
Clock day.
Clock day.
Clock day.
Yeah, I think all Lingít dogs know chook. Okay. Yeah, and some of these situation, right? So there are chook does not mean I would like to get past you and you're in my way. And so these are cultural things as well, right? Like, because if you say chook, you're saying like, get out of here, right? That's basically the equivalent to saying, you get out of here, like you leave this place. It's not like step aside or stand back or anything like that. So just be careful on how you're using some of these. They're good to know. But there's another phrase, it's a longer phrase. You could say ʼadudli.átk, which I'll put in the chat. That's to say it to one person. You can also say it to multiple people. And this means forgive me, right? So usually there's some serious offense that has happened when you say ʼadudli.átk. Although sometimes it's used, you know, we were kind of taught to start our speeches sometimes with that because we just wanted people to know, I'm just learning Lingít. So you're kind of doing a preemptive, if I mess up here, sorry, you know. Oh yeah, sorry, ʼadudli. Oh, ʼadudli. No, I didn't even write it correctly. Sheesh. So ʼadudli. But we were using that phrase for like, I'm trying to get, for excuse me. Like excuse me in English is used for so many things, right? It could mean any, like, you're in my way, I didn't hear you, I'd like to have your attention, I'm walking near you, I farted, I burped. Like it can mean any of those things. So we were at a language immersion and like, you're trying to walk and maybe somebody's busy doing something, but they're in your way and you're trying to get past them. So we would say, we didn't want to say chook because we knew we'd get in trouble. So we'd say ʼadudli.átk, which we thought was like a pretty good way to do it. But the elders said, you're wearing that phrase out. We gotta tell you this in English. You don't say that if you just need someone to step out of your way. And so what they taught us was you say, which is get out of my way. But it's also, the languages work differently, right? Like, so if you're at a coffee shop and you didn't know someone and they were in front of you and you said, get out of my way. Like they'd probably be like, gee, but in Lingít, it works, it's just saying, step out of my way, right? And so it's not, it's interesting how languages communicate things differently, I think. Okay. So for come here, a single person, come here, you'll say, hagu.
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 To multiple people, hat'i'a.
Hatia.
Hat'i'a.
Hatia.
Hati.
So Lingít changes. There's some verbs that change a lot, whether you're talking to one person or more than one. Okay, so we'll look at that stuff. Yeah, ḥusteeyí, that's a good one. Sheesh, everybody who's keeping the chat going too. It's good stuff in there. And feel free to chime in if you have thoughts, things you want to share. There's a lot of cultural knowledge around all of these phrases as well. Oh, here. Ach, I'll check the spelling on the middle part. That's what we were taught. It's like, I don't know, it's interesting how it works because j is sort of like possession. Yakanach is sort of, I'll have to look at it.
I think too that in some places, it's not polite to ask someone to move out of your way. They are doing what they are doing, and your respect for them means that you pause. So I appreciate you giving us the nuances of these phrases, because I think there is a lot of cultural freight with them.
Sheesh.
Question.
Just
like what ḳusteeyí put in the chat about using ḥusteeyí or for the difference between for child and not child, are any of these shouldn't be used for non-humans, like using for dogs? Like, is there any of these that would be rude for using for an animal, or would be rude for using for a child when it's commonly for an animal?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think a lot of people probably speak to their dog in a similar way that they would speak to young kids. Like, not everybody's the same, right? Like, some people have really different relationships with, like, for some people, like, that dog is a worker. It sleeps outside, it does its job, and I don't have to talk to it and baby it. But some people really baby their dogs too. So, and their cats, and whether, so like a pet type of animal tends to have like a childlike relationship, and that means all the commands, all the do's and the don'ts. When you get into wild animals, you don't really tell them what to do. I don't think. And you don't point at them, you don't laugh at them. Those things, there's like a reverence for a lot of things in the animal world, which is really interesting. I was just talking to Akshet about this yesterday. When I worked in Skagway, this scientist got in touch with me. I was working for the tribe, and he said, hey, we're going to come to Skagway and we're doing a study on these toads. And we just want to check with the tribe to see if it's okay if we study these toads. And I said, well, they're an indicator species, but also in Lingít, like, you're not supposed to mess with them, or bad things are going to happen. But what are you going to do? And he says, well, we do pick them up, and then we take off one of their toes, but they don't feel any pain, and so they're okay. And I said, you like cut off one of their toes? I said, how do you know they don't feel pain? Do you speak toad? Do you talk to them? because I don't think you should do that. And they end up like adjusting their whole sort of strategy. And so I think sometimes in other cultures, like animals are just these things that have no feelings and other things like that. There's this real sort of interesting way. But in Lingít, you talk to them and you also be careful how you talk to them. I think you get into this almost a ceremonial type of language sometimes, especially if you're talking to a bear, like that's a really different conversation than talking to your dog. I think for Lingít people, it seems like the dog is like, you're just talking to like one of your kids, although sometimes maybe you're not giving them though. It's not like you sit there tell big stories to your dog. Maybe some people do. I probably won't tell my dog stories, but yeah, that's a good question. And so to the people who are higher status than you, which would include elders, people not in your clan, people you don't know, you're usually pretty careful with commands and usually pretty careful with teasing. But if you know them and it starts to get pretty fun, like there's a lot that can happen too in the languages. If you know people who speak Lingít, there's a lot of laughing, there's a lot of funny stuff, like funny stories, funny, this thing sounds like this thing, and you know, there's a whole lot, and there's a whole bunch of place names that have, you know, penis and breasts and other things that are in there, and sometimes those are kind of funny and sometimes they're just kind of matter of fact, but sometimes we don't translate all the things, you know, because if they found out we name mountains like doesn't masturbate, you know, it has a second side meaning, and sometimes that we get worried. I get worried that then the people who are in charge will say, you guys can't name things anymore. I was like, we've been doing this for 15,000 years. So yeah, and respect, as long as there's respect. But again, it's not always as cut and dry, because if it's two people who really know each other, they could tease each other about an awful lot. As long as nobody's hurting feelings, I think that's, but it's that way in English too, I think. If two people really know each other, they could, you know, I know there's lots of people who, if grandma suddenly walked in, she'd be like, what are you guys doing? You know, and so really good question. Okay. So if you are inside and you're telling someone to come inside, that's the key. You have to already be inside. You would say to one person, Neshka. Neshka. To more than one, Neshia. 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 One person to sit down. Qanu. Qanu. More than one. Qayqi. Qayqi. And these four are a really good example of how the verb sometimes changes a lot when it's a command form. Because you'd say neish gu for come in. But if you said they, a singular they, came into the house, you'd say neish uwagut. So a T pops up on the end. And if more than one people came in, you'd say neish haswu'at. So a T pops up there. It just kind of falls off. Here, somebody sat down, they sat down, wunuk. A K is on the end of here. Here, they sat down, haswuqin. So an N goes on the end of that. Yeah, cool.
One of my old friends, George Stephen Sr.'s son, instead of saying Neshko, sometimes he'd say that, but a lot of times he would just say go when someone knock on the door. Now, how common is that?
Yeah, and so that's just getting straight to, so that would be, there's a couple of things that do go on here. Is one, is he's taken the naish off of there. So go would be a, what do you call, like a zero group command, which would be naish, hot, There's quite a few of them. And then go. So he's just going straight to the verb. But sometimes this you're going to hear go for walk. And other times you're going to hear na go. And that's getting into a deeper conversation about Lingít grammar. A Lingít verb is associated with a type of motion. You have it what we call a zero motion. I'm going to just put these in here so that we could see them. Zero, na, ga, and ga. You will see these pop up in the command form of the verb. So here you just have go. So that means it's a zero because that's just how we mark, like there's nothing there. If you want to say like go over there, you'd say wei de na go. So the na would pop up there. Go over that way. And same with nata, go to sleep. So that tells you generally, and this is kind of theoretical stuff, a zero is associated with a definitive end or goal. Once you're inside, you've made it, right? Na just has to do with ongoing. It's just saying go over there. It's not about arriving someplace. It's saying go that direction. Ga is associated with upward things, and qa is associated with downward things. That's why you have qa for sit down, qannu, and you have ge, which is from ga, which is upward, for stand up. Okay. And good questions popping up in the chat. Like when you say this one down here, so we'll say these two and then I'll get to this thing because I should put in here, there is a Teslin variant for this one and it goes like that. So one person to stand up, you'd say, get on.
On.
Get on. Get on.
Get on.
If you're not from Teslin, you want multiple people to stand up, you'd say, Gaidanak.
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 You are from Teslin, I think. Let me know if I got this right. Gingdanak. Gingdanak.
Gingdanak.
Gingdanak.
In there. So yeah, sometimes this if this were, there was another question in there, if that was long, you'd have as opposed to So the vowel length, I do think, takes a little bit of time to hear and also to remember. Like when people first start learning Lingít, they're like, oh, there's all these wild sounds, like to say a little swan, it's and so there's a string of sounds like and like all in a row, right? And so sometimes that could be really tricky for folks. But then I think sometimes folks lose their focus on the vowels because they do move. Sometimes it'll go from, so you see this neshg. So sometimes you'll have woo-goot, kukwagoot, uwagut. So that vowel is going to change, usually in pretty predictable ways. Okay. Sheesh, good stuff. If you want someone to, so this is get up, more like they're laying down, maybe sleeping. This is also wake up. So there's two ways to say this one. There might be, there's probably even more. She didn't.
She didn't.
She didn't.
She didn't.
She didn't.
For the short form. Oh, it's short form. It's more like get up right now. Shinde.
Shinde. Shinde.
Shinde.
Shinde.
And you all get up. Shaydaqi.
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 So we use these exclamation points usually to say like, this is a command, or this is a do it or a don't do it type of thing. So that's usually, we just mark those with the exclamation points that folks know. Kind of a teasing one quite often. And this could mean quite a few different things, I think. Like, I did something silly, you did something silly, and we're just going to tease you about a little bit. And it goes, do.
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 Okay. And this one has 3 different ways, maybe there's even more, to say it. And so this is, it's too much, you took it too far. It kind of depends. Holy cow, can't even, like, it's always interesting to think about, like, what's the English equivalent for this? So the short form might be gla.
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 And this is not usually traditionally gla with a GL, but I do think it has become that as we start to lose some of the Lingít sounds. So when I first moved to Juneau, I saw a license plate that said hot gla. And I was like, what on earth is hot gla? I feel like that's supposed to be a Lingít thing. And hot gla is just a transformation of hadla, right? So there's the longer form of how to say it. Hadla.
Hadla.
La.
Hadla.
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 Adla.
And in the interior, you might say hado.
Aw.
Hado.
Definitely heard
Hado.
that. Hado.
And there's usually laughter with this one, I think. So this one isn't really like you took it too far and now we're all pissed off. It's like it's sometimes the jokes on building the jokes and then you're just letting someone know like whoa, 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 and so, but it's usually still pretty funny, I think.
I've also heard my auntie say just hado.
Mm-hmm.
Drop the L. Hado.
Yeah, that's the last one right there.
When I was growing up, my grandmother, Annabelle Vowels, she always used it to refer to people, specifically kind of women who were kind of too much, or how we would use the word extra nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story I shared about my auntie was one of them, and I only knew her by that is in when I was growing up, and I finally asked for them, and they're like, oh, she's auntie too much. I was like, oh, okay.
Sometimes they'll say like putting on airs or something like that, or
Exactly.
Yeah, some of this stuff can be used too to be like, you think you're so great, huh? Yeah, and so then and it's always interesting to see like how these, and it's a situational thing a lot of times, and a lot of that situation has to do with, again, that the relationships, the kinship, the situation. Is everybody just generally laughing, or did something serious just happen, or do we need to maybe bring someone down a notch, which is delicate stuff because sometimes we bring ourselves down all the notches, right? So well, for me, is, but it could be a holy cow type of thing, but for me, is a little bit more of that realm, where I think it's still usually we're still in this good humor type of thing. There are other phrases when stuff does get serious, bad news, getting angry, and stuff like that. And that's why they're fun to look at, because there's so much you communicate, and a lot of it has to do with tone, the tone of your voice as well, not just high tone and low tone, but how you're saying the thing, right? And here's that's what you get. Hachqua.
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 Or the short form, chqua.
Hachqua.
Chqua. if something happens and you're a little surprised, and again, it kind of depends. I've heard this one used teasingly, and I've also heard it for like, someone tells you something you had no idea about it. And then also you're a little surprised by the whole thing. Ha. Ha. And I've heard this one in Yakutat as he. That's how Frank Italio would say it. And he'd just pop it out right in the middle of a story. He. Because he was like, oh man.
In Tesla, there's a joke. How can you tell when you've impressed a Tlingit? They say, holy. And when they're really impressed, they say, ho.
Yeah, ho is a variation of this. Absolutely. So ho, same thing. Like, wow. And sometimes it's a wow thing, right?
Kune. For hachgwa, she used to say it without the ch sound. She would just say hagwa.
Hagwa.
Yeah, I'm not sure if other Teslan people heard that too. A little bit different.
Okay. Yeah, and heat. So let's put some variations on this one as well. These are all ways to say like, oh my, type of a thing. Sheesh. Yeah, and it's fun to look at these because people, every time we do this, like there'll be folks who are just, oh yeah, I remember it used to be said this way too. So, sheesh. So here's a few others. So this one, it depends on how it's being used. It could be used as a greeting. I hear storytellers, they'll just use it for like to take a little breath in there. So they'll be like telling some big, huge raven story, and they go, how? Right? So it's just like, well, and then also it could be used if someone says something and you got to sort of think about it for a second. And so one of the things you can do as you speak more and more Lingít is start removing from your speech patterns. And you can replace it with awe, how. Those are really good substitutes for You'll sound like you're just a real Lingít speaker. Because, you could say, ʼyakehat ʼxusteeyí if you just substitute those, ʼyakehat you're still speaking, and they're just nice ways to take a pause and collect your thoughts. Sometimes you just need to think of the next thing. Awe, how. They do have meaning, but sometimes they're just used to say, I'm still talking, or let me think of this for a second. Okay. If you're tired, exhausted, you could say, hui.
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 And yeah, as if you watch conversations with especially sometimes there's elders like Jacques Alice Taft documented these whole bunch of elders having conversations, and sometimes they are just quiet, and then sometimes they'll just go, oh what, and then and that oh what, because it could also mean I would also like to speak. Right? So like turn taking and stuff is really interesting in every language. Like how do you know when it's your turn to talk, and how do you signal that you're going to talk? So okay. So more some like kind of bad stuff, like you hear some bad news, or so this is like a oh no type of thing, or something bad happens, picking berries all day and you spill the berry bucket or whatever. Akana.
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 And then Shikshani, Marge Dudson, she told me this one. She said when her mom, like if she heard some really bad news, like something really bad happened to somebody, they're gone, or boat wrecked or car wrecked, there's all kind of really bad stuff. And you'll see Raven, he uses this sometimes when he's lying, like he'll eat the salmon and then people come back and be like, push katan, the big rock just rolled over our salmon, it's gone. But it's just bones because he ate it all. But so this phrase is like, oh, terrible. Push katan,
Kushkadan.
Yeah, not kushtaka.
I know. I did. Freudian slip.
Well, that maybe there's one, and then the next one, right? Kushkadan.
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 And then yikes. Atskani.
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 And so yeah, scary. But the reason I put sort of yikes in there is because I hear people all the time try and say like it was atskani, and that's not. It's a phrase. Like it is very scary, right? Like big spider, whatever the scary things are, the spider, the rat, the mouse, the creaky noise outside, whatever the thing is, right? So atskani is an in the moment, that is scary. That's what you say when something's scary. But it can't be used like a verb, like it's gonna be or it was. But yeah, it's creepy, scary. It made you really good examples. But it could be a dialect thing. If someone's saying utskani, it could, like I heard oo when I would expect ow quite a bit in Yakutat, especially working with some of the older speakers who were there. And then take it, nah.
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 Nah. Nah.
Nah.
Nah.
Very short way to say like this is for you, right? So take this. Take it. Bought your candy bar, whatever.
Question. So back to the Lingít sense of space. Can nah only be used for something in hand or close, or can it be like across the room? Someone came over and was like, it's at the door. Nah.
I think it's probably just handing it from me to you. I would think. Yeah, because then you would have to, I think you would switch to a verb to say like, go get it from over there, or, these things are outside in a truck, just go grab one. I don't think, no, I think it's specifically like, here, take this thing right here. Good question. And anybody let me know if you've heard otherwise or you think otherwise, I'd love to hear. Okay, maybe we'll do one more. So this one is really handy. And so it's really neat to look at this document too. This was probably, I wasn't there. So it was probably a springboard for what became beginning Lingít, right? Just like, what's the order of how you teach things? It's really interesting to me. And how do you teach someone a language? Like those are things I think about all the time. And the thing I probably think about the most is, how do you get people to talk? Because I got all kinds of friends and we just blah, 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 just talk. I'm like, hey, let's all speak Lingít. It's like I just hit the mute button with that thing. And there's quite a few who just really engage, but it's, for whatever reason, there's this just sometimes a real trepidation when it comes to speaking. And so I'm really focused on trying to get beyond that. Like, it doesn't matter if it sounds awkward. It doesn't matter if when you speak, you don't sound like somebody who was born in 1850. And it doesn't matter if sometimes you're going to say one thing when you try to say another thing. It's all fine. One time, You know, you ever have a kid, like they just throw a fit and they kick? Sometimes that could be so frustrating. Like I was trying to give my daughter water the other day, and she was in bed. She was mad about something, and she just kicked in the air and kicked the water and spilled it on herself. And that was bad. That should have been the hachqua a moment, but I was mad. But one time I was trying to get something happen, and one of my kids, they kicked their foot up in the air and slammed it down, and it came down on a sensitive body area. And so I wanted to say, that's what I wanted to say, because I speak to my kids in Lingít, but I said, for whatever reason. And she said, I'm not fishing you. And then we just laughed. And so it was fun and funny. Everybody's going to make mistakes. And don't let the fear of mistakes get you. Don't think that you're going to break the language. Don't think that people are going to laugh at you now. Like whatever those things are, like maybe, you know, we're all on Zoom for here, but maybe this is just a suggestion. Just on your own, you don't have to share it, or you can do it in small groups. Just take a bunch of little pieces of paper and write down all the reasons why you shouldn't or can't or think you're hesitant to speak. You know, I'm scared. I'm scared I'm going to get it wrong. I'm nervous that someone's going to laugh at me. I'm afraid that I'm going to mess up, and then I'm going to just, whatever the things are, write them down on a bunch of little pieces of paper. Build yourself a little fire, put some tobacco in it. Say something to the ancestors. One qanin's joy is saqite qutatiach tlaqi tlachtwash qwa. Wasach to us sagu qinach aya. Kawadai wa hayuqatangi. Achoy gata yijide kakwati. Yankuka kakhe kakshakit. Dasa tlachtwa oshka. Khat itishi yuhan. Khwasaku wasai tlatzin. Qallachchita khaya kakhia. Yata. Qallchti denawe yuqakwata. So, like just speaking, Hashil Kohas, our ancestors, our grandparents. Khatitishi or Khatitishi. Help me. I wrote down on this piece of paper everything I don't want. Maybe you'll haul it away from me because I know you're strong. We can ask our ancestors for help. We can ask the ancestors for help. And then I would say, put a little tobacco in there, put it in the fire. Try and get rid of those hesitations, those thoughts, whatever those doubts are. You know, sometimes I sit around and think, man, I'm not good enough for this. I'm not going to get it. I'm not smart enough. Because I had people my whole life tell me, you're not smart enough for that. I still have people today telling me you're not smart. You know, I'm like, it's just a thing that happens. But just believe in yourself. ʼadudli.átk. And ask for help. Ask your friends, ask your teachers, ask people who've done this before, your language community. Ask the ancestors, ask the animals, ask everything. It's good to humble yourself, but it's also good to just have a process, like believe in whatever your process is. That's my process. I was like, I don't know, we burn things to give it to the ancestors. And I asked an elder one time, and they said, the ancestors are strong. They could carry things that you can't, and you don't have to carry these things. The trauma that comes with language learning in indigenous communities is very real. But so is the release of that trauma. And what that means is like all these hard feelings because sometimes it's like, we'll put them on the table. I can't. Like, okay, I'm glad I got that off my chest. But then it's like you pack them back in your suitcase and keep dragging it around. It's like, you could, just let it go. We don't need it. And I think sometimes there is a whole other mental, emotional, spiritual side of language learning. Saqit. I like that word. It's like a beaver dam. But then sometimes I think, well, the beaver is going to help us. Maybe we need to just dam up the other part of our brain. Just go dam that part of my brain. ʼAdudli.átk. And then but always think of these processes as you're going through, and just go for it. Just go. Because, once we as a community start really speaking, we won't be stopped. We won't be stopped. Okay, so the last one from this set is just sort of saying like, what's your name? But I also put in here is like, how are you called? Which is, I'm not saying it's one or the other. It's just wasa is usually a how type of question. And then duasak means somebody repeatedly calls it this. People call it that. Okay, so there is a pronoun in here, du, which if it's built into the verb means people do it or it happens. Okay. So this is usually what we call the fourth person. So, I is the first person, you are the second person, they are the third person, people are the fourth person. And so Lingít has a fourth person, and it's used for quite a few different things, and it's used in this verb. So like this verb is literally, you're saying like, people call me this.
A lot of times how we use this as in introducing ourselves. If people call us a name compared to the name that was given with intention, like ʻasaʻí, should we, like, people call me Koch Ganuka around Klukwan. That's what people call me. Mm-hmm. But, the name I've had since I was younger was Kook. So when I say what people call me, I'll say you do a sock. Well, I mean, not say you do a sock. I mean, do a sock. You do a sock. And so my question is, if like I was going to say kook, you cut, instead of saying you cut to a sock, would it be like kook, ʻaʻsaʻí kook, or kook? That's where I'm stuck right there.
Yeah, so you can say ʻaʻsaʻí awe. I can say ʻaʻsaʻí awe ʻchone. Right? Or and when it comes to like introductions, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. Whole bunch. One of the good tendencies is to move away from having everything end with ayachat. It's a good starting point, but if you find yourself saying ayachat literally means I am, right? Like, so I remember when I was learning Lingít and I just say everything, like chukachati ayachat takloiti tachchan ayachat kakwantan yadi ayachat shkakwe ayachat shkut kwan ayachat. And so there's at least one of them in there that sounds like technically not that great to say I am Skagway, right? Because like, here I am Skagway, right? It's so, but then there's ways to cut that where sometimes once you're in an introduction, whoever's listening to you knows you're already telling us who you are. So you don't even have to say yourself a whole bunch of times. You could shortcut a bunch of stuff because people already know what you're doing. But then there's other ways to use more, to say I live here, was born there, and then you start getting into a few more verbs. So in the beginning Lingít workbook, there is a template there, which is just a template. It's not the official way to introduce yourself, but you could say ʻaʻsaʻí awe ʻchone. That is one way to say it. My name is, that's my name. You gotta be careful too. Some people have multiple names, and maybe there's a context for that, to stand up and say 2 or 3 different names. If for some reason you felt like people were questioning whether you were the right person to do this thing, and then only every great once in a while, you might bring out these names that you would carry and who gave them to you. So if people were beginning to like question, like if there was some situation where people were, trying to say I wasn't who I am or whatever, they're giving me a hard time. Then sometimes I'll stand up and I'll bring those people into the room. So sometimes you need to do it, but also you could easily cross a line into bragging. And so you got to be careful not to brag. Like, I have 7 names, right? And it's just like, because then you're going to get the hadla from the auntie. You should. That's when the auntie should chime in. And just,
Yeah, I guess that's why I was asking, because it seems like I've been using ʼadudli.átk for years, and I've been feeling funny about that, because I can say Dave's not here, man, ʼadudli.átk, because that's what the nickname around Cluckwin is. Dave's not here, man, but it's not what my name is what I guess what I'm getting at.
like Walter Sobolov had several names, but then there was usually people just, they have one that they end up preferring to use. And everybody's got their individual journey with their Lingít name. For some people, it's, I thought it was this, but it's actually that. And so you go through and you make a change like that. For other people, it's like, well, this is the name I was born with, but most people know me as this name, so that's just what I'll introduce myself as. And then for some people, like on a day-to-day basis, I'll tell people it's this, but if it's ʼqueeyí, I'm going to introduce myself as that. So it kind of depends. But like, there's certain people like ʼqāchaqti. That's the name I think Walter Sobolov used. ʼqā'u, that's the name that Cyril George used, but he had other names too. But that's usually, there was one that if they stood up to introduce themselves, they would kind of have this one that they used. And several of the elders, like, they have 2, 3, 4 names, right? Good question. Okay. Yeah, and is there another question about names? Go ahead.
Yeah, so my mom is English and Polish, so I was never born into a house moiety or had any of the celebration or blankets or anything given to me. My dad always called me shadow chaser when we were hunting, because I would run to the shadow and then I would wait and he'd follow, and then I'd run to the next shadow and I'd sit and I'd wait. So he called me shadow chaser as a joke. And he asked that gentleman that I had brought up earlier, how would you say shadow or a shadow chaser? And he couldn't really say shadow chaser. But what he did, he asked someone else, in his area, Yakutat area, and he came up with, and he spells, I don't know, I think it's just an old style of spelling, but 2 E's here, I can spell it. ʼe'ahai is how he spells it. And when I look up shadow, I see ʼduyahai, if I remember correct.
So
I was just,
go ahead.
I was just curious if that was kind of dialect. Would it be ʼyahai if it's my shadow?
Yes.
Would there be a better term for shadow chaser? And that my other thing is I don't want to disrespect this person if they translated it for me. So would I go with what they gave me, or if I found another way?
Yeah, like it could be something that gets adjusted a little bit. So yahayi is a relational noun. So it's a noun that needs to belong to another noun. And it could mean shadow, image, photograph. It could be any of those things. So the I or the E is your. So ʼiyahai. So if I say ʼiyahai ʼkhusteeyí, maybe I'm looking at your photograph. I see your picture. ʼduyahai is their, a third person, a singular third person. I see their photograph or image or shadow. ʼayahai, I see its shadow or photograph. So I probably use but it kind of, in the context, I don't know if the shadow is the shadow of a person. Like if you're in that other person's shadow, then I might say ʼqāyahai, but then I probably want to switch it, because that's actually a word for ghost. It means a person's image. So there's a Raven story called Yesh ʼqāyahai, Raven in the Ghost House. And that's how they kept saying ghost was ḳayahai. There's another name for ghost, which is sekeqawu, which is like a smoke person. So I would probably say it might need a little, maybe consult another speaker. And if the name is still being formed, if it wasn't brought out at a naming ceremony, then there's probably some wiggle room, especially as we sort of try and figure out some of these concepts are pretty complicated. Like this whole bunch of stuff where it's like you can say it in English, like how you say that? I'm like, I don't know, because that gets so complicated in Lingít. But so yeah, it's a good question.
And follow up to that was, you know, would it be inappropriate to say, I mean, eventually as I figure it out, would it be inappropriate to say that's my name, since that's, or would I say, you know, that, well, that's what my dad calls me?
That's another really good question. So I think folks and families and sometimes language learners can have that are what are kind of nicknames, right? And then as they go along, and there was a time, I think, where no matter who the mother was, if they were in Tlingit country and they're lineally Tlingit, that they got a name. And they say, okay, well, you married someone who's Dene, but your father's father is this. So those people will be adopting that person and making sure that you have a name and a lineage. I think with the combination of just the loss of language, the attacks on our culture, and then some shifts among our people in terms of what makes someone Lingít, I think that that's fallen out of practice in families and clans, and also just the communication between the clans has been under attack for 100 years now. But I think it could easily be something that's, this is, you know, and there's ways to say it. And you could just say that's what I'm called too, because if you just say that's what I'm called, you're not saying this is the official clan name. Sorry, my kid gave me a fun drawing. It's like handed it to me. But then like that could end up becoming your name through adoption, through, you know, the shadow part is one I'd want to sort of ask around a bit, because I know ʼte'ch can also be a shadow. And so it could be, there could be a different way to say it where it's not, because the Yahai, you know, then someone else brought up yakwaheku, and that's the living spirit inside of everything. So everything has a yakwaheku, and like a deer, a rock, a salmon. There's a spirit in everything. But these are really good questions, because identity and names is complicated, and it's also something that I think we have allowed ourselves to leave our people outside of the clan house a lot. But it's a complicated thing, because it's kind of up to the clan, but it's also up to the families. And so usually whoever your father's people were would end up taking in the mother and the child. So that's how things used to be done. Yeah, good question. Okay, well, let's learn this phrase, and then we'll start getting into wrap up mode. And don't feel bad if you think, oh, I felt bad because I asked this question. That's all we did, because we're just here to talk about Lingít, and the culture and the language. They're all intertwined, and so is the learning process. So with the whole concept, I think of a MOOC is we just do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we do a whole bunch of stuff. And then by the end, we're building a community, and we're all collectively trying to learn things. So to ask what somebody's name is, so the part right here is you. That's the object of the verb. How you people call is basically the parts that are there. And to say that, and for some people this is I, for other people this is E. Kind of depends on where you're from. Kind of depends on some other things. But we'll just say it as I. Wasa itu wasak.
Wasa
itu wasak.
itu wasak.
Wasa itu wasak.
Wasa itu wasak.
So there's this KW at the end as well. So what that W means at the end of the word after the K is that there's this little, just like you're blowing out a little candle. It do a sock. So you get this little puff of air at the end with your lips rounded. And so your name would go here. There's a whole bunch of fill in the blank things in, as we learned Lingít. And then there's two ways you're going to hear this thing. Sometimes you're going to hear you do a sock. Sometimes you're going to hear yay do a sock. Okay, you and yay. They are not quite interchangeable. Here's the pattern. And this is kind of an advanced thing. It's not a right or wrong thing. If the name comes right before the verb, you should be saying, you khat do a sock. If the name comes after or it gets separated by other parts of speech, it should switch to yay. Okay, so I might say, ʼqusteeyí khat do a sock. But if I'm telling some story about where my name comes from, ʼachawe ye khat do a sock ʼqusteeyí. That's the pattern. If it's immediately before the verb, it should be you. If it's somewhere disconnected, especially after, more commonly, it should be yay. So we won't say our name, but you could fill in the blank later, your name, and you would say, and look at the tone, high, low, 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 high. Okay? You khat do a sock.
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 You
khat do a sock.
And there's a couple other common things that happen. One is people will just forget the pronoun. They'll say, you do a sock. You do a sock. And that's saying like they are named ʼqusteeyí. The other thing that happens is sometimes as teachers, this switches from I to khat. So we put a lot of emphasis on this khat. And we end up going, you khat do a sock. And so the khat ends up going like kind of a high tone thing, but it should be low. You khat do a sock. Okay, so those are just the things to keep in mind. If you're not quite familiar with this sound yet, try to say khat instead of hut. That'll also just switch to an H. And it's okay if those are things that are happening. It's all part of the learning process. Some of the worst things that could happen is people who stop speaking because they couldn't get it right the very first time they said it or early on. And the other thing is people who shame people because they don't sound like a Lingít, because they're just learning. It's okay. So the other thing is this phrase could be used to ask what something is called. This could be a person. So I could put a kinship term at the end of there. What's your mom's name? I could also put an English word in there. Fork. And now I'm asking, what is the name of, what is this thing called? But it should really only work for nouns, right? Or names. Names or nouns. Like, what's the name of this? What's the name of that? What's this thing called? What's that thing called? It doesn't work so well for phrases. I'm hungry. Most people will just answer. They'll just answer. But you're looking for a phrase, not really. This is usually like, what is it called? What's the name of that thing? What's it called? Okay. Great stuff, everybody. And so it's wasa do a sock, and then you do a sock, right? And this could be for a whole bunch of things, right? You do a sock away. Ha'ani. Our land is called Lingít. So let's chat for a little bit. Tomorrow is going to be a little different. I'm going to be in some training to develop a podcast on language revitalization with like the iHeart Media Network. It's super cool stuff. But that starts at 5 o'clock. So it should go for about an hour and then I'll jump in. But some other very capable, wonderful folks are going to lead you through an exercise. I'm going to try to sign on so I can make someone the host, and that way it can be recorded. But if it doesn't work out and we're too in the moment, that first part of class might not be recorded until I come in. So we're going to wing it a little bit tomorrow, but there's wonderful folks here who could teach you all kinds of stuff. There's so much knowledge in this group, and I'm so thankful that folks are stepping up. Yes, in the chat. So you, if the name comes right before, yay, if the name comes after. Yeah, I'm gonna interview people from other language, like the Hawaii folks. I can go bother them. Like ideally, I just go places. Like I'm go see what they're doing in Mohawk country and interview them. But for now, I'll probably just mail them a microphone. Just like, let's have a Zoom call and then we'll record it. Let's see. Oh, I've been working on fish. Okay, hold on. Let me put that. So you'd say gat dat. Okay, I'm gonna show you guys how to look up something if you're looking for something, okay? So we're gonna jump to the Tlingit verb database. And then I'm gonna go to search and I'm gonna just type work and see what comes up. So I entered work and it brought me to this verb root, nay, okay? So here's nay, whole bunch of verbs under this one verb root. I actually think there's a couple different verb roots in here, but that's okay. I think one of them is to carry multiple objects. I think one of them is to do something. It's a do it verb. So you get like to restrain, to get revenge, to demonstrate something for someone, to have an accident or get hurt, to straighten something out, to finish it, to get dressed up, to be ready, to work on something, for something to happen, for someone to fix it or to do it, to work in general, and then for something to occur. And we're going to look at this verb and then I'll get to Isaiah. So we're going to look at this one. Okay. So if I click on the yellow, it's going to open the verb. Here's the command form. This is a good one for fish, like or any kind of foods. Let's see. Might have missed something in the chat. Okay. So, oh yes, I'd love to talk about Hebrew. It'd be wonderful. Sheesh. So you get a command form. So there's the command form. This is a na conjugation. So you're getting ye dana ne. Work on it. Don't work on it, which, you know, I don't. And so this is the one I would probably use. Chat ye dachane. Or ye dachane. Sorry, I got the ye dachane. I am working on fish.
Is that anything like the word like da when you're like for working around something?
Yeah, it's just built onto the verb.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to cheese for the Susie and Jimmy recordings. Okay. Isaiah, do you have a question or a thought?
In fact, I do. So the Nay, listing had a superscript H at the end. What does the superscript H mean?
Great question. So there's a bunch of stuff you got to learn about a verb, right? And so what this shows you is what we call the verb theme. Like this is the theme right here, which is basically saying we're creating a code, a shorthand code, so we could tell you all the things you need to know about this verb. So some of the things is, does it have an object? Yes, there's an object pronoun right there. Does it have a subject? Yes, there's the capital S right there. What's the classifier group? It's a zero group. What's the verb root? It's right there. What this H shows you is this is what we call, so the other thing that we mark in a verb is called, we call it stem variation. Verbs will go, they'll change the vowel. So if we look in here, it's short and high, just the letter E with that mark over it. It's long and low, the EI unmarked. It's long and high. So it has those, it has all three possibilities. Those are the three. You usually don't get short and low, not in just a verb root. So what this shows you with this letter H is what we call fading stem variation. What that means is if you put a repetitive suffix on the end, let's see if there's one. I don't think there's one on here, maybe. Well, if you put a repetitive suffix on the end, it's gonna stay low. That's what that's showing you. And if it's not there, then you would predict it to be high. So there's a few things that combine, and this is a pretty advanced concept. The conjugation type plus the verb, the stem variation, plus the verb mode. We call it mode to say, to go from command, prohibitive, imperfective. They're kind of big fancy terms. The do it, the don't do it, the happening now, the not happening now. Those three things combine to tell you what the stem is going to be. That's a really good question. And it brought us right to 7:30. So now you can go to sleep tonight and dream about stem variation and conjugation types. Wherever you're at in your Lingít journey, like some of this stuff, you're like, I don't know what a conjugation type is. It's okay. It's okay. Keep studying Lingít and it will make sense. There is this third language, which is very off-putting for some, challenging for others, interesting to others, but it's the language of Tlingit linguistics or linguistics. But you don't need to be a linguist to understand this stuff, but you do need to, at some point, to get a grasp of what this stuff does, because it'll tell you how to predict a whole bunch of stuff with the verb. But there's just quite a few things that get packed in there. Excellent. Ganesh Cheesh, everybody. And we will see you folks tomorrow. Ganesh Cheesh to our wonderful and brave and brilliant folks who are going to start us off tomorrow. And I'll be hopping on somewhere between 6 and 6:30, I imagine.
Ganesh Cheesh.
Ganesh Cheesh.
Yeah, Kwasati.
Ganesh
Kawu.
Cheesh.
Wooch, yeah, gáchlatsin.
That would you wish.
Ganesh Cheesh. Okay.